of God's organization. And in time, they finally put him on probation and disfellowshipped him because he felt if he was going to be involved in an organization, he needed to know for sure. He needed to know in his own mind completely whether or not there were answers to these questions and whether or not his concerns were indeed valid. And so when he was disfellowshipped, his whole family was no longer able to talk to him. His mother, his brothers, his sisters, all of his relatives were totally cut off. And being cut off completely from all of these people was so traumatic for him that he finally committed suicide in front of the Kingdom Hall. He literally blew his head off with a shotgun, which caused quite a stir in the community. But here was a young man who I knew fairly well. He was torn between trying to find answers to his sincere questions and trying to please his folks, but yet he couldn't deny his intellect. He couldn't deny these concerns. They were there. And he told me once, I can't just tell myself, forget about them. They are there, and I have these questions, and I think about them. And I just can't flush them out of my system as they want me to. I need answers. I want answers. I feel I should be able to go to the elders for answers, and that they couldn't provide answers was very tormenting for him. So he was torn between his intellectual doubt, his questioning, and between what happened later, which was total cutting off of him from his family, including his wife and his children, who were also witnesses at that time. So to me, this was a very tragic story, but yet in many ways is very typical of why people are disfellowshipped. By the way, the most common reason people are disfellowshipped is for sexual reasons, but the second most common is for questioning different aspects of the Watchtower Society, and these are often sincere questions that these people propound. So for questioning, for sincere questioning, many of these people's lives are ruined.
I'm reminded, Jerry, of the judicial committee system as an elder, and you were an overseer as well, so you were quite familiar with the system of judicial committee, whereby if a person in the congregation came into some error or they had done something wrong, whatever the case may be, if it was of serious enough import, we would haul them in, three elders, and have a hearing with them, which could lead to anything from a severe disfellowshipping, removing from the congregation, or to a probation, to a series of things, a lecturing even, but usually it had fairly heavy import. Now surely this must have, I've seen cases, I've sat on many of those, where people would break down in front of us as they discussed the things that they were guilty of and so on. And I could tell that they came in just totally unnerved to sit before us. That used to cut me to the heart a little bit, I must confess, because I thought we were their shepherds, and yet they seem to have an incredible fear of us as they come in to see us. This must have an effect on an individual. This must have something to do with the emotional distress that some could feel, even some sort of a fear syndrome that could seize an individual. What did you find on that? What's been your experience in that area?
I agree very much. I've had a lot of experience in working with judicial committees on both sides in my case, and it's extremely traumatic for many people because your future, and many people believe your life literally hangs on the decision of those in the committee. And it's really not a very just situation because here you are in a closed room, you by yourself, in essence three opposers, three people who are trying to hear the case, and it's very difficult, I think, for justice to be served in that situation. And if they're out to get you, which in many cases they are, no matter what happens, you've lost. And on the other hand, if they're out to condone what you're doing, which in some cases they are, you've won no matter what you say. So I think a lot depends upon the people hearing the case. And I've worked with many cases which I thought were very traumatic in their extent and what happened. One person, he found it so traumatic that he committed suicide shortly before the judicial hearing because he realized what hung on the balance there. And I guess he just didn't want to face it. He couldn't face it. And so he did commit suicide. And one case I worked with too, that there were a number of people accused of doing something wrong. And we brought the first one in, and this person was found guilty and put on probation. And then the first person said, well, I've been caught, I've been exposed, let's bring in Brother Jones and Brother Taylor and Sister Smith, because they were all doing the same thing. It was not a major thing actually they were doing, but, and then one of the other witnesses said, well, we don't want to make this a witch hunt. We'll just prosecute you and we'll stop there. And this made him very angry, because he felt, I did it, fine, I'm taking my punishment, let's punish all the rest for doing the same thing. And they didn't want to do that. They stopped with him. And he later on left the organization, not because he was put on probation, but because he felt it was so manifestly unfair that they caught him and he got convicted, but everybody else got away with what they were doing. And it was so minor, I really don't even remember now what he was found guilty of. But I thought the injustice which was illustrated there is a major problem in these hearings. And also you have no real way of appealing what's going on. And this is traumatic. If you don't get a fair shake the first time, basically you're finished, because there really is no effective, just appeal system. That it's totally up to those elders in that room what happens to your fate.
Yes, you're right, Jerry. I'm reminded of the so-called appeal committees and so forth, and they were in place. It was ostensibly an arrangement that a person could appeal their case, but usually the deck was loaded. Basically, it became nothing more than a kangaroo court. Essentially, if a person was disfellowshipped by one group of elders, it had to be some sort of a horrendous case of some nature that would bring in people from the outside and circuit overseers and one thing or another, that it had been such an obvious mistake. Would the appeal be, the actual case be dismissed or rescinded? Generally, the appeal was nothing more than an exercise. Yeah, you're right.
This raises the whole question of justice, and I found that oftentimes when people face the judicial committee and when they realize that there doesn't seem to be much justice in the Watchtower Society, that many leave because of this lack of justice. And this, of course, has been a major concern among dissonant witnesses in the past few years, the lack of justice. Many witnesses feel powerless in the Watchtower Society. They feel like a prisoner, that their whole life is ordered and scheduled, that they really have little control over their own life. And this feeling of powerlessness is a very common precedent, we could say, or antecedent to individuals who develop depression and emotional problems. This is why we put people in prison, because prison puts them in a powerless situation, and this is punishment. Likewise, we find many people in the Watchtower Society see themselves as powerless in an unjust situation, and this typically causes, in many witnesses at least, severe problems.
Jerry, we've been talking an awful lot about the way this whole thing has affected individuals. But I think a thing that has to be, or an area that has to be examined somewhat, is the family. I remember very clearly as an elder numerous cases of real dissension in families. Children becoming very rebellious, as a matter of fact, and wives and husbands interchanges that seem to be very, very negative, and that come to us with some of these problems and so on. And I remember many, many cases of children, as soon as they became in their late teens, just leaving the organization and leaving their family, running away, in fact. And this is obviously indicative of incredible stress within the family unit. Jehovah's Witnesses like to speak about the happy families. Many of the articles seem to have headings, God's happy family and happy family units within the larger family, as it were, and so forth. And I don't think the facts really prove this. I think that we find an awful lot of cases of family breakdown, as a matter of fact, from these pressures of meetings and so forth. In your examination and the cases that you handle, possibly in a clinical way, as well as, of course, as an overseer, did you find this to be the case, or what exactly seemed to be the situation?
Yes, I agree very much so. It's my experience as well, both of those, with those people I've worked with, as well as my own personal experience, that the Watchtower Society is